There you go.
Is that it? Recording now. Okay. I want to make sure. All right. So the beginning part was chapter 5, and it said apply your knowledge to the content of this chapter to the quantitative bullying intervention study by Perkins, starting on page 98. And the qualitative adolescent homelessness study by Handleby. So starting on page 148, it said consider the quantitative bullying intervention study, identify the main variables, that is A, independent, B, dependent variables, and C, for each identified independent variable, we needed to indicate whether it is a measured variable or treatment variable, and what might be an example of a confounding variable. We want to start with our main variable.
Yeah, so for the independent variables, I got the same peer norms and the perception of peer norms and degree of peer influence. I was just a little confused as to how you exactly measure that, but it helped to see that that was your answer too.
Oh, good.
Variables, bullying, perpetration, and victimization. And then the confounding variable, I actually wasn't sure about, but after I saw your answer of crowd behavior, that made sense.
Okay. And I'm not sure if that's right. It just sounded right. Like crowd behavior is something that they couldn't measure or control, right? So that's why I kind of thought, well, a crowd behavior could be a confounding variable. I don't know if I'm reaching or not, but I just figured that that might make sense.
It does.
All right.
I wouldn't have anything to add to that just because I think it's pretty accurate to what I wrote as well.
Okay, perfect. So should we move on to number 2?
So can you guys think of more possible confounding variables? Because usually we have several confounding variables, not just one.
So could we add, here's another thought, but I didn't know if I could add it in the independent and confounding. Could it be could it be both? Because I thought their perceptions could also be a confounding variable. I don't know if that's correct or not.
Okay, confounding variable is different from the independent variable because, you know, the independent variable is the one that you want to measure the impact of, but the confounding variable is the one that you don't like. You don't want to be there, you know? So they're changing or messing up your conclusions. So you change the independent variable to see how it affects the dependent variable, but there's always some confounding variables that, you know, like for example, students get tired, you know, or students are having some family problems, or they learn something at home, or there are other interventions that you're not aware of. These are all confounding variables.
I think, yeah, in my answer, I also put like pre-existing knowledge of the actual norms about bullying because they were kind of measuring pre and post.
Yeah, that could be. Like if you look at the textbook, like maturation, history, these are the things that is most of the time when you have like a pre-test and post-test, there's always changes out of your control. Like when students get mature, you know, probably they behave better and has nothing to do with your treatment. That's it.
Okay, so we could add then pre-existing knowledge of peer norms. Is that what you said, Sandra?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and add that. Okay, moving on to number 2, using the models provided in this chapter, write a purpose statement for the bullying intervention study in your own words. How does your purpose statement compare to the statement that the authors provided at the end of the paragraph 10? So we each wrote a purpose statement, Professor. Should we each read our purpose statement? Is that kind of what you're suggesting? And do we include just a one overall one in our answer, or would you like a separate one in our own words? Because we each wrote one. Is he there? Okay. We'll just go on without him. All right, so for my purpose statement, I wrote, the purpose of this quantitative study is to examine the relationship between the perception of peer norms and bullying perpetration and victimization among middle school students. And then I said that my purpose statement compared to theirs was very vague because they went ahead and outlined, it was similar but vague in the sense that they outlined specific 3 important questions in relation to the perceived peer norms and bullying.
And then my purpose statement was, the purpose of the current study is to examine misperceptions about bullying and its effects on personal involvement in bullying. The authors also want to examine the impact of actual bullying norms on personal involvement in bullying. So again, it's pretty similar to the purpose statement. I'm just used to, when I write research papers, to be specific. So it's hard not to be specific without restating what I said or what was already said.
Okay.
And then for me, this quantitative study aims to investigate how the perceptions of peer norms relate to bullying behaviors among students in public middle schools. I kind of just reworded it in a sense. And I again, like what you said, it's kind of hard because the authors was definitely more in depth and they kind of touched upon the 3 research questions in a concise way. So while I did try to put everything in there, still wasn't as detailed.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so on number 3, the authors referred to 3 research questions in paragraph 10 of the bullying intervention study, and for each question we needed to determine whether it was a descriptive, a relationship, or a comparison research question. So for A, the extent and direction of misperceptions about bullying, as well as how much variation in perceived norms exist, I believe is relationship. Agreed. All right. And then for the next one, the degree of association between perceptions of the peer bullying norm and personal involvement in bullying. Can you turn that off, please? Is also relationship.
Yep.
And then I think for C, the impact that might be produced by disseminating actual norms about bullying in adolescent populations was descriptive. Are we in agreement with that one? All right. For number 4, the author stated several hypotheses in the.
I need to ask a question because I need to know how or why do you think the first one is relationship? You mentioned extent and direction of perception. Yes.
Yes.
So how is it relationship? Because when you say relationship, it's a relationship between 2 variables. Like the second one is relationship because you're looking at the relationship between perceptions and parents and personal involvement. Yes. So the second one is actually a relationship, but for the first one, why do you think this is relationship? Because when you say relation, you've got to
explain why, right?
To explain what. No, you don't need to explain it. As a part of the assignment, but because I don't agree with you that it's relationship, so I'm asking why do you think it's relationship?
Well, maybe the wording kind of threw me off because when it says as well as, I'm thinking that there's supposed to be a relationship between the direction of the misperceptions and the variation, but that could be misconstrued, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't say the relationship, it says extent and direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a comparison?
Descriptive.
No, because in comparison, you're comparing 2 things. But here, it's not relationship and it's not comparison, so it's going to be descriptive, I believe.
Okay. I think what threw us off was the as well as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All righty. Well, thank you for pointing that out.
And what about the last one?
Maybe
The third question.
the impact that might be produced by disseminating actual norms about bullying in adolescent populations?
No, what's the question? The third question. The third question is comparing.
I'm not following you.
So here we're talking about the author's 3 research questions, yes?
Correct. Yes.
And in paragraph 10. So what's the third question in paragraph 10?
The third one we read was the impact that might be produced by disseminating actual norms about bullying in adolescent populations, which we...
Okay, so it's about impact, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
So impact means that you want to like see how things change, yes?
Mhm.
Like you're comparing like before and after.
Mhm.
Okay, so that
Yes.
one we put descriptive because to me it sounded like they were going to describe the impact. But I see what you're saying. You're saying they're going to compare the impact that it had on them, correct?
Yeah, so you know, if you look at it that way, you might be right, you know, describing the but also you can look at it this way, that you're comparing the results before and after. So I would say both is okay,
Okay.
descriptive and comparison.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
All righty.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to interfere, but
No, you can interfere all you want.
I can't. I can't.
No.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Okay.
your input. We
It's
appreciate
okay. I'm gonna put my mic on mute.
it. Okay, we're going to move on to number 4.
Okay.
All right, so number 4, the author stated several hypotheses. I can't speak today. In the report of the bullying intervention study. So we were supposed to look at paragraphs 21 through 24 and consider the second hypothesis, which was in the middle of paragraph 21. And then the third hypothesis at the start of paragraph 22. And the question was, are these hypotheses examples of null and or alternative hypothesis? And I'll let you girls start.
Okay, so for both of them, I considered them an alternative hypothesis.
Okay.
And my logic was that, because hypothesis number 2 was I hypothesis that students' personal behaviors and attitudes are associated with what they perceive to be the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So I suggested that it would be alternative because there was a relationship found between the personal behaviors and attitudes and what they perceive to be the norm. And then that's kind of just like a quote from the actual reading. In which it kind of validates what I'm saying. So variation in personal attitudes and behaviors observed among individual students was highly correlated with variation in their perceptions of the peer norm.
Yeah.
And for the third hypothesis, the third hypothesis was that an intervention providing students with information about actual norms to challenge misperceptions of the peer norm would reduce misperceptions and in turn reduce the actual levels of bullying and support for bullying and raise levels of personal support for reporting bullying. So again, alternative hypothesis, as there's a relationship between being exposed to accurate norms about bullying and reductions in misperceptions, which reduce the actual levels of bullying and support for bullying, while simultaneously raising levels of support for reporting bullying. And again, it's just kind of like a little quote supporting what I kind of.
Yeah, and I have nothing really to add because what was there was really what I had as well. I also both put alternative for the hypotheses and had the same quotes. So
Okay. What I think I'll do, girls, if you're okay with it, is I'll mix all 3 of ours together. This way it's not so long for him to read.
yeah,
And then I'll just take our names out, if that's okay. When it says do your own personal in your own words, I'll leave those up with our names. Is that okay?
You don't need to have our names on there.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Just take them out. Okay.
Yeah.
I just figured, I know for number 2, it said in your own words. So I figured for that one, I would leave our purpose statements in our own words. But for the rest of them, I would just take them out just so that I just put my name up there so you guys know what I was saying.
Mhm.
And so vice versa. All right. Do we want to add anything else to that? I'm in complete agreement with what you said, Sandra, and I like the way you worded yours way better than the way I worded mine. So good job. All right, so for number 5, it said, now consider the qualitative adolescent homelessness study, identify the central phenomena explored in the study. So what I quoted was, many of the world's wealthiest nations have a large homeless population, but adolescents who are homeless face a unique set of challenges. So
I had the same.
you had the same, okay.
I didn't necessarily, as you can see, use the quote, but it's more so kind of the same thing, like the current policies that are affecting homeless youth. I felt that was a central phenomenon. But if you prefer to use the quote.
We can use both. I think both sound good. All right, for number 6, it says, using the model provided in this chapter, write a purpose statement for the adolescent homelessness study in your own words. How does your purpose statement compare to the one the authors wrote into the study? And so again, my purpose statement, the purpose of this qualitative study is to discover the unique set of challenges that homeless adolescents face when living without a home, obviously, which is kind of redundant because if you're homeless, you don't have a home, but all right. And mine was similar to the authors that were in paragraph 21. It sounded quite similar. The authors wrote the overall purpose of the study was to explore the experiences of homelessness among adolescents. However, the authors did go into more detail like they did in the last study, and they added 4 research questions.
And then I kind of just wrote, the purpose of the current study is to examine the experiences of homeless adolescents in regards to gender, health, public policy, and barriers to healthcare. So again, similar to what they wrote, I just kind of concisely wrote all the research questions into one sentence.
For me, I put the goal of this qualitative study was to investigate the complexity of homelessness as experienced by adolescent youth. Same as me, I feel like it was similar to the author's version. Tried to keep it general because I guess that's what the difference is with the qualitative versus quantitative. But the authors, I feel, is still definitely more succinct.
All right. Okay, so for number 7, we needed to consider the research questions provided in paragraph 21 of the adolescent homelessness study and identify each question as either a central research question or a sub-question. So for number 1, how is homelessness experienced by adolescents? If you guys are in agreement, we said that's the central research question, and then all the others would be a sub-question.
Yeah.
How does the gender shape these experiences? How is health perceived? And then for the last one, how does the current Canadian policy shape these experiences? So I think those all add to the central research question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Shall we move on to chapter 6? All right, so for chapter 6, it said to apply your knowledge of the content of this chapter to the quantitative early intervention outcomes study by RASPA, found at the end of this chapter starting on page 216, and the quantitative bullying intervention study by Perkins, found at the end of chapter 3. So we needed to consider the information provided in the quantitative early intervention outcomes studies title and the abstract, the purpose statement, and the start of the methods section, and the description of the study's procedures and results. And then based on this information, which type of quantitative research design did RASPA use? List 3 pieces of evidence for your answer, and does the title help you tell what type of quantitative research this article is? So I'll let you start, Sandra, since it looks like you had added that information.
Yeah, so Victoria and I were on this document for quite a bit yesterday, figuring this out, just because we weren't sure whether it would be a correlational research design or a survey research design, because the study did distribute a lot of surveys and kind of just, it was very murky. However, we kind of just agreed to write whatever we thought and see if it would justify. So I think we both chose correlational research design. And so my reasons were that the study described relationships between variables, which were how the family outcomes relate to different children and families, and how intervention programs related to family outcomes without manipulating what they experience. That is, the participants were already part of this program. and the researchers didn't add them to the program in both Illinois and Texas. And then the study also uses a single group individuals. So again, they were all participants who were pointing that and taking in that information. And then they also use multiple statistical procedures to analyze the data to test for relationships. So descriptive statistics were taken, correlation matrix, and exploratory factor analysis, and multiple regressions using a hierarchical linear model. And it did. However, the title kind of threw us off because what was the title again?
Early intervention, or measuring family outcomes in early intervention.
Yeah, so intervention kind of threw us off because you would kind of assume that the researchers would be doing interventions or intervening, but after reading it, I feel like it's more so a correlational design.
Yeah.
My justification for that.
Without having looked at what you ladies put down, that's what I came up with too.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay.
so when I saw yours, I was like, oh, good, theirs is the same as mine. So
yeah, I had to even email the professor because I was getting tripped up with some of the terms that are used because I use similar reasoning as you, Sandra, just I put quotes instead of explanations. But even for, I think for the researchers collected information for each variable, actually, no, not that one. I think it was the first one. It can get a little bit confusing when they're describing relationships because when one might impact the other, that's considered experimental.
I think experimental is more cause and effect though. So one directly causes the other, whereas like an impact or an association or a relationship isn't necessarily an experiment because A doesn't cause B. You know?
And then the other thing is, I know with non-experimental research designs, like the correlation design, the conditions aren't manipulated, but I was getting tripped up on the fact that they're making this new survey to have these families complete. So I don't know if that was considered a manipulation. That's why I started getting confused. But definitely, I feel like it was a correlational design after I looked for some examples in the text. And when it says regression or correlation, that's obviously correlational. So that kind of helped me along trying to figure it out.
I'm just curious, what did the professor respond to you after you had emailed him?
He had me refer to minute 1 of his lecture and then page 190, I think 198 of the text. It was basically just saying the difference or like what kind of makes an experimental design an experimental design. Which I definitely understand. It's just, it gets kind of confusing when the terms are kind of synonymous in like regular layman terms, but not necessarily in terms of experimental research design. So like when it says survey, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just a survey. There's like more things to that.
Right.
You know? So that's where I was realizing, okay, even though they did use a survey in this research study, that wasn't kind of the main focus.
Okay.
And it wasn't a random assignment. So that's kind of the difference between correlational and survey.
Perfect. All right. And then did we want to talk about the title?
Yeah, just kind of along the lines of what Sandra said. It's very confusing because it says intervention, and with experimental research design, it's already referred to as intervention research sometimes. But it's obvious that the conditions weren't manipulated and these participants were already part of the program. We're ultimately just observing them and kind of measuring the variables without concluding a cause and effect relationship.
Okay. All right. So moving on to, did you want to add anything, Sandra? I don't want to leave you out on that one.
Oh, no, that was what I wrote as well. Well, not as detailed, but.
Okay, so for number 5, let's return to the quantitative bullying intervention study. It said to identify the research design used in that study, list 3 pieces of evidence, and what types of claims the authors used. What types of claims can the authors make based on the research design used? So Victoria, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so for this one, the study used an experimental research design, specifically a quasi-experimental research design. The first evidence I had was that the independent treatment variable caused an effect on a dependent variable. So for this is really the misperceptions about bullying was a crucial factor. And intervening basically accounted for the change in bullying. So that was a quote I had. And then the next evidence was the focus of the data analysis was on comparing groups and also pre and post intervention. So that kind of shows the comparison between the groups. And that was a quote that I got. And then the third one, conditions were controlled to ensure any measured effect was the result of the treatment. So my quote that I added was students in 5 middle schools located throughout the state of New Jersey provided the data of the research. Realizing now that's kind of a vague statement to add, but I probably could have picked a different quote that stated, I think there was one quote that said they kept the procedures the same in both, I forget what quote it was, but there's probably a better quote for that, but basically the conditions were controlled in this specific research study, proving that it is a quasi-experiment.
Okay.
I'm just going to write that so we can find it.
Yeah.
I do agree that that quote is a little vague, but I get where you're coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Thanks
then
for adding that.
we
We have about 10 minutes, ladies. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording, but I wanted to chat with you ladies if you're okay with that.
Sure.
I think that was the end of it, right?
And I think the last part too, just based on the experimental design used, what type of claims can the author make? Really that the problem exists regarding middle school students misperceiving the prevalence and support of bullying behaviors, and they can also make the claim that intervention can reduce the misperceptions about bullying.
Perfect. Thank you for adding that. I just saw that on the next page. I was like, oh, I think we're done. Okay. All right. So that concludes this week's discussion. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, but we have a few minutes left to stay. So.